Welcome to another episode of Home Built by Howard. This episode, we're going to get the rear subframe mounted into place and figure out what we're going to do with the rear part of this frame. I'd just like to give a big shout out to Crucible Coachworks. Congratulations on hitting 100,000 subscribers, and thank you for showing and using the sticker that we sent over on the project car. Check them out if you haven't already. So if you're new here, this is my Project TR6 Restomod. I'm cramming all the internals and electronics from a BMW 135 into a custom frame and a TR6 body. So listen, comment, like, subscribe, get that notification bell. Everything helps. And if you get a chance, hop into my bio. There's a link to Hornetic. I make and sell these automotive horn units. Really helps to support the channel. Last episode, if you remember, we took the body off the frame and we got to work on welding out the whole frame. And we're going to continue on with that this week, but focus on the back end of the frame and getting that rear BMW subframe and differential and whole drive unit at the back into place and secure. So let's get started on that, or at least let's take a quick rundown of what we did and where we're going. So last episode, I welded out the whole front, the whole frame basically, all the way to just in front of where the rear suspension is. We also made all of these structural plates that cover up the seams where these 2x3 pieces were butt welded, and I put them all on the outside. Don't believe I need them on the inside. Everything stayed fairly straight and square and level. There's still a little bit of welding to do on the frame, such as getting some seat rails in, as well as the supports for the body, or the original supports for the body. At the back, we gusseted the back of the frame here to give it some extra strength, where I had to do a cutout for the rear the rear subframe suspension. Also welded up all the way around this part here. Now, what's going on over here is what we need to mess with. So in order to see where we're at with that, we need to cut off these extension arms that we welded on to mount the body to, and to mount to our rotisserie. Those have to come off so we can access the mounting location for the BMW subframe. So let's get those cut off and let's get that subframe into place so that we can lift it up and mount it to this body, or to this frame, as the case may be. Okay, so I'm just cutting off the extenders that I had on there for mounting it to the rotisserie here. So I'm just grinding away here and trying to set my nuts on fire, and just clearing a few things up in order that I can pull the subframe, the rear subframe, into place. Bit of a pain in the butt, because of the welding, expansion, contraction, etc. The bolts aren't lining up perfectly, so I'm only able to get 3 of them into place properly, but, that'll do for now, and it's a future me problem, I guess. Well, so something that worked before but isn't working now is that is binding when I'm trying to get the stud into place. And if I could lift the back end, I could squeak it in and slide it into place. It was fitting. It was in there. If you look back at my videos, you can see it was in there, and now it's not. So the easiest thing for me to do with this is going to be to just cut that straight off at the end there and weld a fresh plate onto, or a fresh piece onto the back of that. Now, it's thinner already than, this is thinner than I'd like it to be. But I still have that ability to weld a plate onto the inside of it and strengthen everything that way. Again, it's going to get more strengthening, so I'm not that concerned. So let's lift this back up onto the floor stands, get that subframe out from underneath there, flip it over, cut those off, and I'm not going to weld it right this minute because I don't want to burn myself while I'm working. So what I will do is I'll just cut it off, and we shall weld it later when we get to all the other welding. But as you can see, I had to cut away, and the reason why I had to cut a bunch of stuff away. But let's do that. Well, once we got the right bolts in the right place, it seems counterintuitive, but the longer bolts go at the back and the shorter ones go at the front. So this is now in, and as you can see, there was clearance underneath for it, but it just didn't want to go into place. So, everything else is clearanced pretty good. As you can see, I cut this one at a notch that way and this one at an angle that way. There's the rear spring goes right here, and on the original frame, it's kind of a little tilted in, so it's kind of half underneath here. So I need to make some kind of a plate to hold that spring in place, and it's kind of sits fairly low when it's compressed, and then the shock is right here, and it is outboard and basically comes straight up. So that is where I'm at. The suspension's basically at ride height. It might go up just a tiny bit, but everything, those drive shafts are basically parallel when it's at proper ride height. As you can see here, I'm clear here to this, so I don't need any cutout. I am going to put some kind of a brace from here to here, and likewise here to help stiffen that. But you can see how strong the rear subframe assembly is right from factory. That's why I wanted to use the 4 mounting points for it. So being able to basically take that, and translate it into the front part of the frame is what a lot of the rear roll bar is going to take care of. So I think that I just really need to clean up these cutouts, plate them so that they're sealed, and I'm going to figure out what we're going to do with our shock or our spring as it sits there, because that is an original spring space. So it'll clear all the mechanical components of the original suspension system. And as you can see, that is where it's going to sit there. So let's take a look at what we do next. Okay, so what I've done is I've put the back tires on and got them set to to ride height as far as the suspension is concerned. Got a couple jacks under the back just to hold it at the right height, and got the front lifted up, and these frame rails are zero. That is zero. That is about half a degree out, but again, I think that's just because of the way it was welded in place, because if that's parallel and that's parallel and that's square, then these have to be, yeah. Anyway, so this is actually ride height. I'm just going to crouch down here. So you can sort of see how much ground clearance I've got underneath there. And I did that so that those rails are the same height as the distance from the floor to the bottom of this lip. That is what dictated the 3 inches that I've got on those rails. So they actually sit flush with the underside, and you can't see them when you tuck down. You actually have to look under the car to see the rails. Then this was kicked up and that was kicked up the correct amount to move the subframes high enough when at ride height that they sat in the wheels in the right position, and that the car sat at the original ride height of the Triumph. So as it sits right now, if I take my measuring tape, I've got what amounts to 7 1/2 inches exactly worth of ground clearance underneath this car. The other thing is that the engine, the motor, subframe and suspension all fits under the same height. BMW has that little wear plate that sits right in the middle of the cross member and sits down, and that sits about 1/2 inch below these rails. And the differential sits up above. So I have a minimum of 7.5 inches worth of ground clearance all the way around on this vehicle at the stock ride height that I have designed this for. Now, that doesn't include any extra adjustment that I have in the coilovers that I'm going to put in, or the adjustable suspension that I'm going to put in. So I'm figuring, even with all the adjustments that I have to make in the front suspension, to compressing the springs in order to, fit the engine under the hood, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I'm still going to have at least 1 inch worth of adjustability minimum, that I'll be able to drop this car an extra inch down if I wanted to do that. Not quite sure if I will just yet. I will have to see how it fits. But as far as anything goes, that is level, that is ride height, that is rear suspension mounted and looking good. So we can take a good look at the springs and where they are going to seat, so that I can get those pieces cut and we can do all the welding that needs to be done at the back here in one go. So let's pull out those springs and pop them into place. Okay, so when this was originally designed and measured up, I went under the original BMW and I took measurements from the subframe and how it went over the suspension, etc. And I based the geometry of this on that. So this bottom edge here is where this is supposed to seat. And I have, I think there was a set of cups that were welded up underneath that. So as you can see, if I look straight down the chute here, it sits here like this, and it needs to go in to about here, right? Which means I need to put something that's going to come out like this in here to have this sit on. So I'm going to cardboard something up. What I may end up doing is just taking that spring and, cutting it down to ride height size, So maybe what I'll do is I'll cut it about here, right? That way what I end up with is a spring that's at the height, without having to compress it, because I can't compress it. There's no weight. So I just want to get something in that place that I can then measure from. So I got to figure out if I'm going to do that, but let's start to cardboard out some of the replacement metal that I've got to put into this thing in order to get it to work. And maybe I will go and double check my measurements from my original drawing, and we'll go take a quick look at those drawings. Okay, so tucking back into my original drawings here, you can see that we've got 3.434 inches from the seat of the front bushing support to this baseline, which was the floor under the car, where there's a set of bracket that goes from underneath and then bolts into the frame here as well. So from that baseline, we are 6.0625 up to the center of the top of the cup that holds the rear shock in place. And there's a 6.75 degree angle to that. So moving further into my drawing here, or was the next drawing that has the information. So as you can see, the dotted line is the original car body. And then I've put in my system, or my frame here. So that's where we are at right now with this. Now, what's ended up happening is I actually ended up changing this frame slightly. This bar doesn't sit, or yeah, it does. It sits on top there. But we changed it a little bit so that this seat here, which attaches to this, is slightly below the height of where the suspension was supposed to mount. So I'm going to have to go into my CAD and double check what that actual height is supposed to be, so that I know where on this I need to weld my seat for the springs. Well, it looks like I've been told that I'm not working on this anymore this evening. So yeah, we'll continue on in the garage, but okay. So I got my measurement. So basically we are looking at this being about 1 inch above. So I took some measurements on the CAD here, and this is about 1 inch lower. So my rail here is about 1 inch lower than the shock should sit. Now it's also narrower than the original part, so it doesn't stick out as far from the top. So when I look at it from above, right? And I hide this because I don't need it. It actually, the shock sits kind of in this space here, not underneath it. So, or not completely underneath it. The original frame was further out. So what we're going to end up having to do is cut a little notch out of this piece underneath, a semicircle, and then that's where the spring will sit. So that's kind of where we're at with this right now. I'm going to see if I can dig up my other model because I think I have more stuff in it. But let's take a look.
Okay, so what I've decided to do is come out here to the place where I've got this chassis or body stored and take some actual measurements again, just to double check what the heck's going on, where I'm at, you know, and that way I can figure out exactly where my suspension's supposed to go. So let's do that now.
Well, I've taken a bit of time here and made a little wedge piece template out of cardboard that locates the top of the spring in the correct spot so that it clears everything. I'll still have to come around this knuckle that's down inside here. So basically what happens in the BMW, this part comes around like this, and it's kind of this shape, right? So yeah, just kind of trying to figure this out. Okay, well, after a lot of fussing about, I got this piece cut out. As you can see, it's cut on an angle this way because it's going to match the 6.5 degrees that this bar is at, and that will make everything parallel. I also rounded it off so that when the spring mount sits there, when I put in the cup that's going to go there, and I weld it in place, it will just look a little nicer. There obviously some stuff on the inside that'll need to be customized once this is mounted in the correct place. Now the other thing I got to do is there's a cup that goes over top of this rubber thing, and it's got it sits over top like this, and it has this protrusion that comes out the top that you drill a hole into, and it sits into, so it sits flush. I gotta order a set of them. They're about $20. I'll see if I can get them on Amazon and get them in. But what I'm going to do is I'm gonna cut this out of 2x3 material. I'm going to make a mirrored one for the other side so that they're both identical or mirrored with each other. I'm then going to bend a piece of material around the front of this and weld that in place. And then I will have to see about whether or not I'm going to actually drill the hole while it's on the frame, or whether I will wait for the parts to get here and then drill the hole, and we may move on to something else. But that is going to give us the ability to locate the top of the spring in the right position in relation to the BMW subframe, as well as at the right height, so that I have the correct spring tension, etc., for the BMW's weight. Because I'm getting a set of adjustable springs, I will be able to adjust that spring tension as well on there, depending on how I adjust it. So anyway, that will match the BMW geometry, which means that any aftermarket shocks and springs I get will match. So let's make those out of metal. Okay, so you can see I've just marked it out on this 2-inch by 3-inch tube that I've got. That's the same as the frame rails, and just cutting them out and flattening them off, and just making sure everything is kind of angled right and looks good, and etc. Just test fit them onto place there, and looks good. So I'm going to make the opposite one If you notice my template, I was able to just unfold it and flip it the other direction to get the mirror, because there's actually an angle on the rounded part where it tucks down and back, so that it sits correct. So I was able to just mirror it. And if you get the opportunity to do something like that, where you have a left and your right, you want them both the same, just take your template and flip it over, and then you got a mirror. Well, that makes number 2 on this side. That one goes in here like that. So I'm happy about that. Now we have 2 of them. So now I just need to make the plate that goes over the curved part there for both of these. So I'm going to grab some 2-inch by 1/8 inch material that I've got, and okay, so as you can see, I've just rough cut these, and what I'll be able to do is I'll tack them at the top and the bottom here, and then I can go in with my grinder and just get them, into the right place, so that when I weld them across, then they're it's going to be nice and flush. So let's get set up and ready to weld these, and then we'll be able to tack weld them into place on the subframe. Okay, so those are welded all the way around. They're going to need a bit of a cleanup, but as we learned a couple episodes ago, don't touch hot stuff. So we're gonna let them cool down for a good little while, and yeah, we'll give them a minute, and we'll just sort of look ahead to see what we're going to do next. Right, so at this point, we're going to have a fair bit of welding to do at the back here, both putting these in place as well as then doing some or getting ready to do some bits and pieces. Now, I also need to put in some cross members for mounting the seat rails too. And in order to do that, I have to have the seat in. And in order to put the seat in, I got to put the body back onto the chassis, or at least place it in place. And this will also be a good opportunity for me, to see how the tires are sitting in the rear inner fenders, and also start to look at how am I going to tie this top of this upright down into the roll cage, down to this point over here, where it then will come up into the windscreen. So let's move some stuff around. Let's spin the body around and drop it back down onto the chassis. So as I mentioned before I took the body off, the gussets that we put in here will come out to probably the face of this is what I measured. So I'm going to have to cut a relief in here in order that the floor can come up. But I'm just going to cut a slit on either side of these rather than cut it away. That way I can just use that again. That way I don't need to make a complete new piece, or at least I'll try not to. So let's measure, mark those, and get them cut. Well, there is the body down onto the chassis. As you can see, that's the ride height, which is really nice. I'm quite happy with that. It'll get over curbs, but it's still going to be nice and low because it's a tiny car. As you can see, the the wheel well is a lot of travel, a lot of space up in there. I'm probably going to drop the fender on, just, clamp it on, just so that we can take a look and see how the fender fits over the wheel. Now, these are not the final wheels. I'm probably going to use the wheels off my 650. But I'm not 100% sure just yet. It's either going to be buy new rims for this or buy new rims for that. Got to check on the spacers because these wheels are already sticking out a little bit, like you can sort of get an idea how far they stick out. Really, like this is kind of, where the door is. So, yeah, they stick out a little bit. But, I have a lot of room here. I left a lot of room here that I may not, with the offset on those, I may not need any spacers on the back, but the front probably will. So let's drop a fender on there and take a quick look and see what that looks like. Okay, so you can sort of see what I'm dealing with here when it comes to having to do a wide body on this thing. Otherwise, I got rooster tails every time I go and, try and drive this thing in the rain. From the side, nice, there's a big opening. That's a lot of a gap. But, as I said before, I'm going to be doing a wide body and dropping it down and, doing a few things that are going to close that up a fair bit. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be trimming on this seam all the way across towards the back here. And that's going to get flared out. So when that flares out, it's also going to flare down. I'm going to probably be adding close to, 2 inches to that probably. And it'll taper as it goes back. Then what I'm going to do is this fender here, I'm going to trim that all the way down into here and all the way to the back. As you can see, I've got a chalk line all the way to back here. And that is going to get moved out and is going to get tilted out until this outer edge matches with the outer edge of the tire. So that's kind of the plan for that. It always was a plan to do wide body, but I'm also, because I'm going to be bringing this is going to be coming down, right? And in like this, just because of the nature of the way it's got to move, it will tighten up. And I'm hoping to have, I want to have about 2.5 inches worth of gap, probably about the same as what I've got in the front here. I'd like to have here, so half of what I've got. The reason for that is I'm not trying to tuck these tires under the fenders. I know they're not going to go. The wide body would have to be so wide that it would be, just ridiculous looking. So I want to keep a little bit more of that traditional look to the resto part of the mod. So slightly larger gap in older cars than there are on the new ones. So I'm okay with that. Again, these are not the finished tires. So the diameter of these tires are actually smaller than what I'm going to be putting in there. These are 17s with, a 225, 45, 17, where on the back of the other car, I've got 20s. So I'm going to be jumping rim size on this to a 20 inch. And I'm probably going to not go with like a 25 or a 35. I'll probably go with, a 45 tire. So it'll be like a 365 or a 355 45 20, so it's going to be meaty, and the diameter is going to be quite a bit bigger than what these are, and it's going to match front and back. And this is a rear wheel drive car, so I'm not worried about, if the fronts are just a tiny bit smaller. It's not like it's all wheel drive. So yeah, that's kind of where she sits now. So I'm pretty happy with the way that car is sitting. You know, could it be another inch lower? Well, yeah, it could be. Again, until I get that suspension, I'm not going to know what kind of adjustability I've got on it. So anyway, enough blabber in there. Holy cow, talking about the future. I'm never going to get there if I just talk about it. So let's get the seat in the car. Let's first make sure that the rails are positioned correctly. The motor has the seat rails positioned correctly, so that it can't travel any further backwards. And I'm going to put it in its furthermost back position here, and then we will mark out where the rails sit, so that I can put in some cross bracing to bolt the seats to. All right, so let's grab a seat and let's just check to make sure that that's all good. All right, so I had to fidget around with the seat a lot in order to just get it to be in place. It's still not perfectly square. I got to take some measurements and etc. But I know that, as far as anything goes, front to back, that's kind of where I want my cross brace. It's where it's going to be easiest for me to actually access that bolt and still have enough room to move the seat forward so that I can access the ones at the back. One of those problems is, especially with electric seats, or with any seat, is that the rails and the position of the nuts are such that you need to be able to move the seat backwards and forwards once you've undone one set of the bolts. So you push it all the way forward and you can get at the back bolts, right? But then you need to be able to slide it far enough back to get at the front ones. So if I was to put the rails in a position where the seat can't go back any further, then the rail is like way forward over here. It's sticking out. It looks stupid. And there is no way I have enough travel with my transmission tunnel to get the seat far enough forward to access them. So that's where it's going to have to be. I'm going to have to look at, there's a little magnet and a sensor on one of the rails that tells it when it's reached the limit of its travel. So what I'm going to do is I'll be moving the magnet into the right position so that it will stop in the correct position. It won't go too far forward to damage itself against the tunnel, and it won't go so far back that I'm burning the motor out, running up against the back of the car here. So that's been marked, which means I can now translate those to the frame, and I've got a bit more cutting to do on the body of the car itself. So let's get those translated into cross pieces so that we can get the seat nuts for mounting both driver and passenger seats in place.
One eternity later.
Well, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So the front of this rail here, on both sides, I positioned when I had the engine in with the transmission and the transmission mount, and I bolted those to the transmission mount and had them free floating, and then took measurements. But once I get behind the transmission mount, there's this bracket here that is actually quite narrow, and it sits roughly here, in the transmission. or at least in this vehicle it's going to, because I have to shorten the drive shaft a significant amount. I'm not going to shorten this part. This has the expansion contraction. This is just a stock drive shaft that, I can shorten and then balance. So that is going to move, is going to be back here somewhere. The transmission ends roughly here, like we looked at it, and you remember, if we were looking down this hole, we were able to see this mounting plate is pretty much right here. So dragging this. Let's hold on a second. Let me put this in place. Okay, so roughly, that's very roughly in place there. You can sort of see where that's going to be and how short that drive shaft is. The wheelbase on this car is significantly less than what it was on the BMW. I'm going to have to double check everything. But, the other thing that I've noticed is that this is my outer seat mark, okay, how far it is from the center of the car, which puts my inner seat mounting point right on the edge of that. Now, these are back here, of course, but it's going to be like right on the edge. And that is way narrower than what I have here. So what I'm actually thinking I might end up doing is putting the whole front suspension, engine, everything back into the frame, get everything properly leveled, at ride height. I'll have my transmission in place, get a proper measurement on this, and cut the drive shaft to fit so that I can put it in place and make sure that this is tilted, is at the right angle, that there's a nice straight line, that everything is right. And what I will do is remove the back of this and jog it in so that it runs underneath, right underneath the two screws, the two bolts that are supposed to hold that. That way, not only am I going to capture that, but I'll also be able to capture my seat mount better. And I'll be able to put in some captive nuts. Also, the transmission mount is actually, the back one is back here. So my seat is way over here. I've got about 10 inches there. So I can actually bring this here and tuck it right in, nice and tight near the drive shaft. So I think that that's what I'm going to have to do at this point, because there's just too many variables otherwise. So, yeah, that's kind of the way a project works, I guess.
One pair of pants later.
Well, there we are. I got the motor and transmission and the body back on there. I threw the wheels on just for the sake of, taking a look at it. The front wheels, I know they're kind of tilted in, and, the shock towers don't have the mounts, haven't put them back on. But, just to get an idea of what it's going to look like package, it's nice and tight. I mean, it's a really nice tight package. I have gobs of room at the front, where the front end of the car is for the radiator and the intercooler. Even if I wanted to upgrade both of them, I still have, gobs of room to the firewall. And if you remember, I've got to add a piece into the transmission tunnel here. But, I could even take this and, weld it right on to here and just bring that transmission tunnel there. When I'm in the car, my foot sits right here just really nicely for a gas pedal, for the gas pedal. So, I've already got lots of extra foot space in there that I don't necessarily need, but I'm not going to mess with. I just rather leave that where it is. So that kind of brings that together, back to this point where at least I have the engine and tranny back in place. I now have the rear subframe in place, and I can take the body back off, and we can take a look at that drive shaft, and maybe shorten it up so that it will, tack it together so that it will fit. And then what I will end up doing is taking it into a shop to have them weld it properly and balance it. But, I'm not going to do any major damage to it by, well, I will do a lot of damage to it by cutting it in half and shortening it and welding it back together. But there's a center section that actually expands and contracts that allows you to to either remove the front end or remove the back end. It can't be a solid drive shaft without having to drop the rear end or the transmission. So there's about 2 inches of play in there that I'm going to sit in the middle of and shorten the drive shaft. And then if they need to, ream off a tiny bit and bring it closer together to square it up, then at least there's that play in there, and I won't need to buy a new drive shaft. So that's going to be next on the agenda right now, is going to be taking the body back off of this so that I can get a look at that drive shaft. Now, before I do, these plates that I put on here, they're great. I love them. They're absolutely fabulous. Except when I took that bar off the front, this front end just went sprung outwards like crazy. I was able to get a bunch of clamps on it and pull it back into place, and it's about 1/8 of an inch, under compression right now. But I still have a fair amount of welding to do on that thing that is probably going to pull it in a bit as well, because I want to weld in the seams on the inside, but I also have those spacers on the outside that I got to weld, and I still could put plates on the inside in order to, again, pull that back in, shrink it down. So there's a bit of in and out play that's going to occur. So let's yank this body off, get it off to the other side of the garage, maybe give a bit of a cleanup, and take a look at that drive shaft. All right, so yay, speed time. Body's off, everything's in. I had to jack the car up because the car is too low for that to get underneath it, so I had to lift it up. I have a feeling that I'm probably going to end up at a slightly higher ride height than I thought I was going to be, just because of the suspension. Anyway, so, of all the things that I've done to these 2 cars, for some reason, cutting this drive shaft makes me more nervous than anything else. And I don't know why. It's one of those weird things. But what I've done, just to get it square, is I'm going to use my chop saw, which I've got a metal blade in, and I've just lifted it up onto this little flat 4-inch vise. And although the vise isn't gripping it, it creates 3 points, front, back, and bottom, where the drive shaft can sit completely flat, flush, square to the back, to the fence, etc. And I don't need to really worry about it. So I'm going to see about maybe getting a clamp or 2 just onto that to hold it straight down. But I think the clamps will just get in my way while I'm trying to actually cut it. So I'll probably just hold it really tight. And like I said, for some reason, this is, something that's just making me super nervous. But, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. So let's chop this sucker in half. Oh, we got the drive shaft shortened, as you can see, and I put it in place, and I just have a block holding it. And what I did is I checked that they're parallel to each other, that they're straight for one, and that they're at exactly the same angle. They're at 3.3 degrees. So they're both at 3.3 degrees, which is good. That's what I want. Now, what I also did is I cut this piece out of the original firewall, as it's the original mounting part or bracket for that bushing or bearing there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that and graft it into the transmission tunnel. I made some adjustments here on the transmission tunnel as well, so that it now sits down. It's almost centered perfectly. There's a little bit more finicky stuff that I need to do. So the last thing that I want to get done here, which we started out doing, was these pieces right here, and getting them tack welded or welded into place, so I can get that cup in there. Oh yeah, I need to drill this before I do it. All right, never mind that. We'll order those cups and get to that later. Yeah. Okay, so that is all the time that I'm going to have on this episode. We got a lot of stuff done. We got that subframe in, we get the motor back in place. There's a lot of stuff that we weren't going to do, or we didn't know we needed to do, that we ended up having to do. So it is what it is. It's a project. That's the way it goes, Anyway, thank you so much for sticking around. Like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you find out when I've got new videos coming out. Really appreciate you sticking around if you stuck around till the end, even if you just skipped to the end. Awesome. Really appreciate it. Make some comments. It really helps the channel. And if you get a chance, hit up Hornetic and pick up one of those units, because it's going to help support the channel. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next episode.